The room fell completely silent. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of polite conversation, the distant swell of the orchestra, it all just stopped. If you're watching this and you've ever felt the soul-crushing weight of being utterly invisible to the one person who should see you most clearly, please subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Knowing I'm not alone in this feeling, it helps more than you can imagine. But let me back up. Let me tell you how I got to that moment standing in a room full of strangers with my heart shattered into a million pieces. My name is Dorothy Williams, though most people who have known me for more than a week call me Dot. I'm 68 years old, and until 2 weeks ago, I thought my daughter Sarah respected me. I thought she loved me. I was wrong about a lot of things, it turns out. The wedding was everything Sarah had dreamed of since she was 12 years old, meticulously planned and lavishly executed. The setting was the Ashford family estate in Connecticut, a sprawling expanse of manicured gardens and a mansion that looked like it had been plucked directly from a movie set. There were 200 guests, a 12-piece orchestra, and enough flowers to stock a city florist shop for a month. Michael Ashford's family had money, the kind of quiet old money that goes back generations, the kind that whispers instead of shouts. And my Sarah, my beautiful Sarah, had landed exactly what she'd always wanted. I'd driven up from my small, humble apartment in Hartford that morning, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. I wore a simple navy dress I'd bought specifically for this occasion. It wasn't a designer label. It was from a department store, respectable and elegant in its own quiet way. At least I thought it was, until I saw the other guests. The women were draped in fabrics that shimmered and flowed clothes that undoubtedly cost more than my monthly rent. They wore diamonds that could blind you catching the light with a fiery brilliance. And they all possessed that particular look of unshakable confidence that comes with never having to check your bank balance before making a purchase. Sarah looked absolutely stunning. She wore her grandmother's vintage Chanel dress, a delicate creation of lace and silk that I had carefully preserved for 40 long years waiting for this very day. It was the same dress I had worn when I married her father Frank, back when we were young and foolish, and thought love was enough to build a life on. Sarah had insisted on wearing it, and I, in my sentimental foolishness, thought it meant something profound to her, a connection to her roots to us. How naive I was. The ceremony was perfect if you liked that sort of thing. It was impersonal and grand, held under a canopy of white roses. I sat in the second row, strategically placed, right behind Sarah's college roommate and her husband. A small, almost imperceptible slight. Patricia Ashford, Michael's mother, sat in the front row like a queen, upon her throne wearing a string of pearls that probably cost more than my car. She had been politely, icily cold to me since we first met 8 months ago. It was the kind of coldness that comes wrapped in impeccable manners, but cuts just as deep as any overt cruelty. After the ceremony during the cocktail hour, I was standing near the terrace doors, trying to feel less like an intruder. That's when I heard Sarah's voice, a bright, clear sound that had once been my favorite in the world. She was talking to Patricia near a massive arrangement of lilies and hydrangeas, probably thinking the swelling music from the orchestra would cover their conversation. But I've always had excellent hearing, a blessing and a curse, as any mother will tell you. Don't worry about her, Sarah was saying, her voice a low, confidential murmur. She glanced in my direction, a fleeting, dismissive look. She's just a pathetic failure. Nothing like you. She's never accomplished anything worthwhile. I mean, she worked at the public library for 30 years. Can you imagine anything more depressing? Patricia nodded approvingly, a small, tight smile on her perfectly lipsticked mouth. Well, at least she knows her place. Some people from simpler backgrounds can be so pushy about inserting themselves where they don't belong. My hand tightened around the stem of my champagne glass, my knuckles turning white. Simpler backgrounds, as if dignity and a lifetime of hard work were something to be ashamed of. My mind reeled, a flood of memories washing over me. I thought about the double shifts I'd worked after Frank's first heart attack, the exhaustion that had settled deep into my bones, all to put Sarah through a good college. The countless sacrifices Frank and I had made so she could have music lessons and summer camps and all the opportunities we had never had. We had poured our entire lives into her, and this was the result. A daughter who saw my life's work as depressing. That's when I remembered the letter in my purse. A thick, sealed envelope. Frank had given it to me a week before he died. His hand weak, but his grip firm on mine. If Sarah ever treats you badly, he had said, his voice a hoarse whisper, but his eyes clear and determined. You read this out loud. Promise me, Dot. She needs to hear what I really thought about some things. I had carried it with me ever since a sacred, painful talisman, never imagining I would actually need to use it. But standing there listening to my daughter describe me as a pathetic failure to a woman who saw me as beneath her notice, I realized with a sickening clarity that Frank had seen something coming that I hadn't. He had been watching Sarah change during his final painful months, and he hadn't liked what he was seeing. The reception dinner was a blur of forced smiles and meaningless small talk. I was seated at table 8, strategically placed, far enough from the head table to be out of the main line of sight, but close enough to not be obviously exiled. My dinner companions were distant relatives of Michael's family, who made polite, excruciating conversation about the weather and the beautiful flowers, while carefully, studiously avoiding any questions about what I did for a living or where I came from. I picked at my perfectly cooked salmon, the food tasteless in my mouth, and watched Sarah work the room like the savvy politician she had always wanted to be. She had graduated from Yale with a degree in public relations and now ran social media campaigns for wealthy, high-profile clients. She was good at it, I had to admit. She knew exactly how to present herself, how to make people feel important, how to say all the right things to charm and disarm. Tonight, she was the perfect bride, gracious and radiant, a picture of class and elegance, everything a rich established family would want in a daughter-in-law. But I knew the real Sarah, the one who had called me in the middle of the night crying hysterically when her rent was due in college. The one who had moved back home for 8 long months after a disastrous relationship in her 20s, her spirit broken. The one who had sat by Frank's bedside during his final agonizing weeks, holding his hand and promising to take care of me after he was gone. Or so I had thought. During the father-daughter dance, the orchestra played The Way You Look Tonight, Frank's favorite song. My heart clenched in my chest. Sarah danced with Michael, of course, since Frank wasn't there to twirl her around the dance floor one last time. I watched her smile and laugh, apparently unbothered by his profound absence. When the song ended, she didn't even glance toward the empty chair where I had placed a small framed photo of him. That's when I knew with a certainty that felt like a physical blow that I had to read Frank's letter. Not to hurt Sarah, not for revenge, but to understand. To understand what had happened to the daughter I thought I knew the little girl I had raised. I slipped away during the dancing, my movements unnoticed in the sea of celebrating guests, and found a quiet, dimly lit corner in the mansion's library. The Ashfords probably had more books than our entire town library, though I suspected most of them were for show, their spines unbroken, their pages untouched. I pulled out the envelope Frank had given me, his handwriting, shaky but still recognizable across the front, for Dorothy. Only if you need it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Frank's careful, familiar script. The date at the top showed he had written it just 3 days before he died. My dearest Dot, it began. If you're reading this, it means Sarah has shown you who she has become, not who she used to be. I am so sorry, sweetheart. I know this will hurt more than anything, but you need to know what I observed during my final weeks. My heart was already pounding a frantic drum against my ribs, but I forced myself to keep reading my eyes, scanning the words that felt like they were written in my own blood. Sarah has been different since she started seeing Michael. Not just happy different, but calculated different. She's been asking questions about our finances, about my will, about what would happen to you after I'm gone. When I asked why, she said she was just worried about your future. But I've been watching her, Dot, and I don't think worry is the right word. I think it's planning. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the cavernous library. Yesterday, she brought me some papers from something called Meadowbrook Manor, an assisted living facility. She said she had been researching options for your future places where you could be properly cared for after I died. She had glossy brochures, detailed pricing information, even a waiting list application, already filled out with your name. When I asked her why on earth she thought you would need assisted living at 68, she said it was just planning ahead. The letter continued for another page, each observation more devastating than the last. Frank described Sarah's increasing impatience with his medical needs, her subtle but persistent comments about how expensive my medications were becoming, her casual suggestions that perhaps I was getting too old to live alone safely. I've changed my will. Everything goes to you now with specific instructions that she cannot contest it. But more than that, I want you to know that the daughter we raised is still in there somewhere. She's just lost her way in this new shiny world of hers. Don't let her convince you that you are a burden. You were the best thing I ever did with my life. And if she can't see that it's her loss, not yours. The letter was signed simply, "Forever yours, Frank," with a postscript that made my hands shake so violently I could barely read it. P.S. I saw the Meadowbrook Manor brochure in her purse again today. She's planning something. Don't let her do it. When I finished reading, I just sat there in that elegant, silent library, surrounded by books that probably cost more than most people's cars, and I finally understood. I understood why Frank had made me promise to use this letter if I ever needed to. He had spent his final agonizing days not just fighting cancer, but fighting to protect me from a daughter who saw his impending death not as a devastating loss, but as a convenient opportunity. I rejoined the reception with Frank's words echoing in my mind a ghostly, heartbreaking symphony. His letter hadn't contained shocking revelations or complex investigations, just the careful, loving observations of a dying man who had noticed his daughter's growing coldness and selfishness. But those simple observations painted a picture that shattered my heart into a million pieces. Sarah hadn't suddenly turned cruel at the wedding. She had been planning my future, my obsolescence for months, researching ways to have me declared incompetent or unsafe to live alone, ways to neatly package me away so I wouldn't interfere with her new life. Frank had seen it happening, and he had tried to warn me the only way he could. I watched Sarah accept congratulations from the guests, her smile bright and perfectly practiced, but now I could see what Frank had noticed. The way she calculated each interaction, the slight, almost imperceptible impatience. When someone took too long to make their point, the careful way she steered conversations away from anything that might reflect poorly on her new elevated status. "Mrs. Williams." A young man appeared at my elbow, one of Michael's cousins, whose name I had already forgotten. "Michael wanted me to make sure you were enjoying yourself. Can I get you anything?" I smiled politely, a feat of immense self-control. "I'm fine, thank you. It's a beautiful wedding. The Ashford family certainly knows how to throw a party," he agreed, then lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Though, between you and me, it's nice to see Michael settling down with someone so practical. After some of the socialites he used to date, Sarah seems refreshingly down to earth. Practical, down to earth. If only he knew what my down-to-earth daughter was planning for my immediate institutionalized future." I thanked him and moved away, needing space to breathe, to think. The irony was overwhelming, a bitter taste in my mouth. Here was Sarah, so desperate to become a part of high society, surrounded by people who on the surface seemed to appreciate her for the very qualities she was so desperately trying to shed. Her strong work ethic, her intelligence, her ability to connect with people, all things she had learned growing up in a modest, loving household with parents who valued character over status. But Frank's letter had revealed something else, something much darker. Sarah wasn't just trying to fit in with the Ashfords. She was actively, methodically trying to distance herself from everything that reminded her of her origins, including most painfully me. I found myself studying the other guests with new, cynical eyes. The women of Patricia's age moved through the crowd with the effortless confidence of people who had never for a moment doubted their place in the world. They possessed the kind of deep-seated security that comes from generational wealth, from never having to worry about mortgage payments or whether you could afford to retire. That was what Sarah wanted. Not just the money, but the peace of mind that comes with never having to think about money. And in her mind, taking care of an aging, unproductive mother was a liability, a threat to that hard-won security. The reception was winding down, but I knew the real evening, the real reckoning was just beginning. Frank had given me more than just his observations about Sarah's plans. He had given me permission to fight back if I needed to. And as I watched my daughter play her role as the perfect bride, her laughter echoing in the grand ballroom, I began to understand with a heavy heart that I was going to need that permission. During the bouquet toss, Sarah looked directly at me and smiled. It was the first genuine, unprompted attention she had paid me all evening, and for a fleeting, foolish moment, I felt a flutter of hope. Maybe Frank had been wrong. Maybe his illness had made him paranoid, suspicious of innocent behavior. Then I heard her conversation with Patricia as they stood near me afterward. "Thank goodness that tradition is over," Sarah said, adjusting her veil with a sigh of relief. "I was worried some desperate woman would knock you over trying to catch it." Patricia laughed a sharp, brittle sound. "Well, at least your mother didn't try. At her age, remarriage would be rather pathetic, don't you think?" "Oh, Mom's past all that," Sarah replied casually, her voice light and dismissive. "She's focusing on more age-appropriate activities now. Quiet hobbies, simple routines. It's probably better for her to accept the limitations that come with getting older. Limitations. At 68, I was supposed to accept limitations and fade quietly, gracefully into the background while my daughter built her grand new life. Frank's letter suddenly felt like a lifeline, a shield against this casual cruelty rather than a burden. He had seen this coming, this slow, deliberate erasure of my worth, and he had tried to protect me the only way he could. I had a choice to make. I could continue being the gracious, unobtrusive mother who didn't embarrass her successful social climbing daughter. Or I could remember that I was Dorothy Williams, a woman who had raised a child, built a career, and supported a husband through a brutal, soul-destroying cancer treatment. A woman who deserved better than to be written off as a pathetic failure by her own daughter. The next morning, I drove back to my small apartment in Hartford, my mind clearer than it had been in months. Frank's letter had given me a new, terrifying perspective on my recent conversations with Sarah, and I realized with a heavy heart that I needed to do some research of my own. My first stop was the public library, where I had worked for 30 years, a place that had always felt more like home than my own apartment. Margaret, my dearest friend, hugged me warmly when I walked into the library on Monday morning. "How was the wedding? I want to hear everything about this fancy family Sarah married into." I'd always liked Margaret's directness. She was 5 years younger than me, but had started working at the library the same week I did, fresh out of library school, and full of a boundless, infectious energy. We had been friends through raises and budget cuts, through difficult patrons and bewildering technology upgrades that left us both feeling ancient. It was quite an experience, I said carefully, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "Actually, I was hoping you could help me with something. I'm curious about assisted living facilities in Connecticut, particularly one called Meadowbrook Manor." Margaret raised a knowing eyebrow, but didn't ask any probing questions. That was another thing I had always appreciated about her. She understood that information was power, and sometimes you needed to gather it before you knew exactly how you were going to use it. An hour later, we had compiled quite a file from public records and online reviews. Meadowbrook Manor was indeed exclusive and expensive, but it had something else that caught my attention, a detail that sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. A program for asset protection that allowed residents to sign over their entire estates in exchange for guaranteed lifetime care. More interesting and more damning was what we found in the online reviews. Several families had complained bitterly about high-pressure sales tactics, about feeling rushed into making life-altering decisions during emotional, vulnerable periods, particularly following a spouse's death. The state had investigated the facility twice in the past 5 years, for inappropriate marketing to vulnerable seniors. Well, Margaret said, printing out the last of our research, her voice grim. This place certainly seems aggressive about acquiring new residents, and their asset protection program looks like it's designed to separate seniors from their money as quickly and efficiently as possible. I thanked Margaret, my heart heavy, and drove home with a box full of documents that painted a very different, very sinister picture of Meterbrook Manor than Sarah's glossy brochures had suggested. But more than that, I had a plan forming in my mind, a sad, necessary plan. Frank's letter was just the beginning. What I needed now was to understand exactly what Sarah was planning and why she was so desperate. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Sarah's college roommate, Jennifer, who had been at the wedding and had always been more forthcoming than Sarah about family gossip. Under the guise of wanting to send a proper thank you note to the Ashfords, I asked some casual probing questions about the family's background. What I learned was enlightening. The Ashfords were indeed wealthy, but their money was relatively new. Michael's grandfather had made his fortune in manufacturing after World War II. Patricia had married into the family 30 years ago, and according to Jennifer's gossipy but reliable sources, she had spent those 3 decades carefully, ruthlessly crafting their social position. Sarah's so lucky, Jennifer confided, her voice filled with envy. Patricia has been taking her to all the right charity events, introducing her to all the right people. She's already talking about getting Sarah onto some prestigious museum boards. After hanging up, I sat in my small, quiet apartment and thought about what I had learned. Sarah wasn't just marrying into money. She was marrying into a social climbing project that had been going on for decades. And Patricia saw my Sarah not as a beloved daughter-in-law, but as a useful tool in that project, someone young and educated and presentable enough to help maintain and elevate their position in the upper echelons of Connecticut society. But that still didn't explain Sarah's cruel and desperate plans for me until I remembered something Frank had mentioned in his letter. Sarah's increasing impatience with the cost of things, my medications, my apartment rent, the small but growing expenses that came with having an aging parent. I pulled out my checkbook and looked at the records from the past year. Sarah had been right about one thing. My expenses had increased. New medications for my arthritis, higher insurance premiums, the cost of having my apartment painted when the management company raised the rent. Nothing dramatic, but the kind of steady, relentless increase that comes with aging. Then, with a sickening lurch in my stomach, I realized what Sarah was really afraid of. It wasn't that I needed assisted living now. It was that I might need expensive long-term care in the future. And if I spent down my savings, my inheritance from Frank on that care, there would be nothing left for her to inherit. Frank's letter had been about protecting me from Sarah's immediate plans, but my own research had revealed something even more disturbing, even more heartbreaking. My daughter saw me not as a person, her mother, with needs and feelings, but as a financial liability that needed to be managed, contained, and ultimately eliminated. That night, I made a decision that would have shocked the old compliant Dorothy. I wasn't going to wait for Sarah to make the next move. I was going to find out exactly what she was planning, and then I was going to decide what to do about it. 2 weeks after the wedding, Sarah called to invite me to lunch. She sounded unusually warm and friendly, which immediately put me on high alert. Sarah was never warm and friendly, unless she wanted something. And after Frank's letter, I had a pretty good idea what that something might be. We met at a trendy bistro in West Hartford, the kind of place that served small, artfully arranged portions on large dramatic plates and charged accordingly. Sarah looked radiant, still glowing from her honeymoon in Italy. She had always photographed well, but her marriage to Michael had given her a new, almost blinding confidence. "Mom, you look tired," she said, kissing my cheek before we sat down, her lips barely brushing my skin. "Are you sleeping okay?" "Eating enough. I've been worried about you living all alone in that little apartment." I ordered a salad and listened to her talk, a monologue of her new perfect life. The honeymoon, Michael's family's vacation home in the Hamptons, the charity boards Patricia was helping her join. It was like listening to someone describe a life from a glossy magazine, all perfectly arranged details, designed to impress and intimidate. Finally, after we had ordered coffee and dessert, Sarah got to the point, her tone shifting from casual to concerned. Mom, Michael and I have been talking, and we're concerned about your future. That apartment you're renting is so small, and the neighborhood isn't getting any safer. We think it's time you considered moving somewhere more appropriate for someone your age. Appropriate? I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Well, you know, secure. With medical services nearby, maybe some social activities. Sarah smiled brightly, a politician's smile. Patricia knows about this wonderful senior community about an hour from our house. Very exclusive, very nice. The waiting list is usually years long, but they have a spot opening up next month. I set down my coffee cup carefully, my hand steady. A senior community, Sarah. I'm perfectly capable of living independently. Of course you are now, but it's about planning ahead. And honestly, it would give us all such peace of mind to know you're somewhere safe. Sarah reached across the table and patted my hand, her touch cool and impersonal. The best part is you wouldn't have to worry about finances anymore. They have a program where you can transfer your assets and they guarantee care for life. There it was, the asset protection program I had researched with Margaret. Sarah wanted me to sign over my inheritance, my savings, everything Frank had worked his entire life for, everything he had left me in exchange for a room in an institution where she could visit occasionally and feel virtuous about taking care of her mother. That's very thoughtful, I said slowly. But I'm not ready to make that kind of decision yet. I'm enjoying my independence. Sarah's smile tightened slightly, the first crack in her perfect facade. Mum, I understand that it's hard to admit when you might need help in the future, but Dad has been gone for 3 years now. You can't keep pretending you can handle everything on your own indefinitely. I'm not pretending anything, Sarah. I'm managing just fine. Are you... Sarah's voice took on a sharper edge. Because I've noticed you seem a bit scattered lately, forgetting appointments, missing calls. Patricia mentioned that you seemed confused at the wedding, a bit out of place. I felt a flash of hot anger. I seemed confused because I was listening to you call me a pathetic failure. That tends to be disorienting. Sarah blinked, clearly not expecting me to confront her so directly. I never said that. You told Patricia I was a pathetic failure who'd never accomplished anything worthwhile. You said working at the library for 30 years was depressing. I kept my voice level, my gaze steady. I heard you, Sarah. That's not... You're taking things out of context. Sarah looked genuinely flustered, for the first time her composure crumbling. I was just trying to reassure her that you weren't going to be demanding or difficult by calling me a failure, by explaining that you have realistic expectations about your place in our lives going forward. Sarah's mask was slipping, revealing the cold, hard calculation underneath. Mom, this isn't about what you overheard. This is about being practical. You're 68 years old. You need to start planning for the future. I signaled for the check and started gathering my purse, my heart aching with a profound sadness. Sarah, I am planning for the future. I'm planning to live my life on my own terms for as long as I am able. And when you're not able, when you fall and break a hip or have a stroke or develop dementia, who do you think is going to take care of you then? The question hung in the air between us, raw and ugly, and I realized this was the heart of it, the root of her fear. Sarah wasn't worried about my current needs. She was terrified of my future needs. She wanted me safely warehoused, contained where my inevitable aging wouldn't inconvenience her perfect new life. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it, I said, my voice quiet but firm. But Sarah, when that time comes, I hope I'll still have a daughter who sees me as a person worth caring about, not just a problem to be solved. As I drove home, the city lights blurring through my unshed tears, I thought about Frank's final gift to me. Not just the letter warning me about Sarah's plans, but the knowledge that he had seen our daughter's transformation happening and had tried, with his last ounce of strength, to protect me from it. Sarah thought she was maneuvering me into a corner, into a life of managed decline. What she didn't realize was that she was actually revealing exactly how far she was willing to go to protect her new status, and in doing so, she was giving me the strength to fight back. A month after Sarah's disastrous lunch invitation, she called again. This time, I could hear voices in the background, and the formal, almost rehearsed tone in her voice told me she was performing for an audience. "Mom, we need to talk. Can you come over this evening? Michael and I have some family business to discuss with you." I agreed, my heart heavy, though I suspected I knew exactly what kind of family business they had in mind. I spent the afternoon preparing rereading Frank's letter until the words were etched into my memory and making sure I understood exactly what I was walking into. Sarah and Michael's house in West Hartford was everything she had ever dreamed of, a grand colonial-style home perfectly landscaped in a neighborhood where the median income required 2 professional salaries and a significant infusion of family money. Sarah had posted dozens of photos of it on social media, showcasing each perfectly decorated room like a spread from an upscale magazine. When I arrived, I found Sarah, Michael, and Patricia waiting for me in the formal living room. The staging was deliberate, designed to intimidate. I was seated alone on one side of the room, while the 3 of them faced me from the sofa, a united, formidable front. It felt like an intervention, which I suppose in a way it was. "Dorothy." Patricia began, her voice warm but authoritative, the voice of a woman used to getting her way. "We wanted to talk to you about some concerns we've all been having." Sarah jumped in, her voice filled with a practiced, convincing worry. "Mum, you've seemed more forgetful lately. Missing appointments, not returning calls promptly. They're small things, but they're adding up." Michael nodded gravely, playing his part. "We think you might be experiencing some early cognitive changes. It's nothing to be ashamed of, but it's something we need to address proactively for your own good." I listened to their carefully rehearsed presentation with a growing, chilling understanding. They had constructed a narrative about my declining mental health, a story designed to strip me of my autonomy. But unlike the fabricated examples I might have expected, these were subtle, insidious distortions of normal, everyday behavior. The missed appointment had been rescheduled by me due to a conflict. The unreturned calls were from telemarketers and Sarah's friend Jennifer, not urgent communications. The good news, Patricia continued, her voice smooth as silk, is that we've been able to secure you a place at Meadowbrook Manor. They have an opening next week, and we can arrange the transition quickly and seamlessly. All you need to do is sign these papers," Michael said, pulling out a folder of documents and placing them on the coffee table between us. Power of attorney, asset transfer agreements, healthcare directives, everything they needed to make the transition smooth and to protect their interests. I looked at the 3 of them, these people who thought they could manipulate me into signing away my life, with a web of exaggerated concerns about my mental capacity. Sarah sat there, nodding encouragingly, playing the role of the devoted, concerned daughter, while actively planning to inherit everything her father had left me. "This is quite a production," I said finally, my voice calm, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "How long have you all been planning this little intervention?" Sarah's perfect smile faltered slightly. "Mom, this isn't a production. We're genuinely worried about you. Are you—" I reached into my purse and pulled out Frank's letter, the envelope worn and soft from being carried with me for weeks. "Because I have something here that I think you'll all find very interesting." I unfolded the single sheet of paper, my hand steady, and began to read aloud. I read Frank's careful, heartbreaking observations about Sarah's questions concerning my finances, her research into assisted living facilities, her growing impatience with the costs associated with having an aging mother. She brought me papers from something called Meadowbrook Manor. I read, my voice clear and strong, an assisted living facility. She said she had been researching options for your future places where you could be properly cared for after I died. Sarah went completely deathly white. Michael frowned, a look of genuine confusion on his face. Patricia's composed, elegant expression didn't change, but I saw her hands clench slightly in her lap, a small telling sign of her agitation. When I asked her why she thought you would need assisted living at 68, She said it was just planning ahead. I continued, my voice unwavering. But I've been watching her dot, and I don't think planning is the right word. As Frank's letter continued detailing his observations about Sarah's cold, calculated approach to my future care, I watched my daughter's face cycle through a series of emotions, shock, then panic, and finally a cold, hard calculation I had never seen before. When I finished reading, the silence in the room was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket. Then Michael spoke, his voice quiet, laced with a dawning horror. "Sarah, is this true? Were you researching assisted living facilities while your father was still dying?" That's when I realized this painful confrontation was just the beginning of something much larger, a fracture in the perfect facade of their new family. "That letter proves nothing," Sarah said, her voice shaking, all her earlier confidence gone. "Dad was sick, he was probably confused. He was seeing problems that weren't there." I folded the letter carefully and put it back in my purse, a precious, painful relic. "Your father was many things, Sarah, but confused was not one of them, especially not about something this important." Michael was now studying the documents on the coffee table. The power of attorney forms, the asset transfer agreements, the glossy Meadowbrook Manor paperwork. "Sarah, when exactly did you start researching this place?" "I was just being prepared," Sarah said defensively, her voice rising. "Someone had to think ahead about Mom's future needs, while your father was dying of cancer." Michael's voice was quiet, but there was a sharp, dangerous edge to it I had never heard before. "You were planning to move your mother into an assisted living facility while he was fighting for his life." Patricia tried to intervene to regain control. "Michael, I think we should focus on Dorothy's current situation rather than relitigating past decisions. Should we?" I asked, turning to Patricia with a newfound interest. "Because I did some research of my own after Sarah first mentioned Meadowbrook Manor. Did you know they've been investigated twice by the state for aggressive marketing to vulnerable seniors?" For the first time since I had known her, Patricia Ashford looked genuinely uncomfortable, her perfect composure finally cracking. "I'm sure any successful facility faces occasional regulatory reviews. Occasional reviews about pressuring grieving widows to sign over their assets immediately after their husbands' deaths." I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder of public records Margaret had helped me compile. "Because that's what the state found. High-pressure tactics rushed decision-making families who felt manipulated into making permanent, life-altering choices during a period of temporary emotional crisis." Sarah grabbed for the papers, her face a mask of desperation. "Where did you get these public records, Sarah? It's amazing what you can find when you know where to look." I kept the documents just out of her reach. The State Licensing Board, Consumer Protection Agencies online, review sites, all freely available to anyone who bothers to investigate before signing their entire life away. Michael was now reading over my shoulder, his face growing paler with each complaint he read. "Jesus, look at these complaints." Felt pressured to decide immediately. "High-pressure sales presentation. Regretted signing asset transfer agreement." "Sarah, did you actually research this place, or did someone just recommend it to you?" The silence that followed was telling, a heavy, damning silence. Finally, Patricia spoke, her voice strained. "I may have mentioned that they had an excellent reputation in certain circles. Certain circles being wealthy families looking to warehouse inconvenient relatives," I asked mildly. "That's a terrible thing to say." Sarah snapped, her voice sharp with indignation. "We're trying to ensure you get proper care." "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You're trying to ensure I don't become a financial burden on your new lifestyle. The difference is that proper care considers what I want, not just what's convenient for you." Michael was still studying the complaint documents, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Mum, some of these families sued Meadowbrook. They accused the facility of elder abuse, of manipulating seniors into signing over assets they didn't understand." Patricia's composure was finally irrevocably cracking. "Those are isolated incidents. Every industry has a few bad actors." "Are they?" I asked. "Because according to these records, Meadowbrook has a specific program targeting recent widows. They market to families during funeral planning, offer estate protection services, and provide kickback referrals through certain funeral homes and lawyers. I watched the three of them process this new damning information. Sarah looked like she was going to be sick. Michael was angry, though I wasn't sure if his anger was directed at his wife or his mother. And Patricia was calculating her sharp mind, probably trying to figure out how to salvage the situation, how to spin this disaster. Even if the facility has some problems, Sarah said desperately, that doesn't change the fact that you need to plan for your future. You can't live alone forever. Mom, why not? I asked. I'm 68, not 88. I'm healthy, mentally sharp, and perfectly capable of making my own decisions about my living situation. But what if something happens? What if you fall or get sick or need help? Sarah's voice was rising, a note of hysteria creeping in. You can't expect us to just drop everything and take care of you. There it was. The real fear, the ugly truth laid bare, underneath all the layers of feigned concern about my welfare. Sarah wasn't worried about my current needs. She was terrified that my future needs might interfere with her carefully planned, perfect new life. I'm not expecting you to take care of me, Sarah. I said, my voice filled with a profound sadness. I'm expecting you to respect my right to make my own choices about how I want to live. Those choices affect other people, Patricia said sharply, her voice like ice. Family decisions should be made collectively, considering everyone's interests. Everyone's interests, I repeated. And what exactly are your interests in this situation, Patricia? Patricia straightened in her chair, her social mask firmly back in place. My interest is in seeing this family function harmoniously. Sarah is my daughter-in-law now, and that makes her welfare my concern. And my welfare, does that concern you at all? Of course it does, which is why we think Meterbrook would be perfect for you. You'd have security medical care, nearby social activities, with people your own age. I had to admire her persistence. Even after being caught recommending a facility with a questionable, predatory reputation, she was still trying to sell me on the benefits of institutional living. Patricia, I said gently, I spent 30 years working at a public library. Do you know what that taught me? It taught me how to research things thoroughly, how to spot inconsistencies in people's stories, and how to help people find the information they need to make good, informed decisions. Michael looked up from the complaint documents, his eyes meeting mine. What kind of inconsistencies? Well, for instance, when someone recommends a specific facility, they claim to have researched, but all their information comes from glossy marketing materials rather than independent, unbiased sources. I looked directly at Patricia. Or when someone is very eager to see a particular outcome, but can't quite explain why that outcome is so important to them personally. Sarah tried to regain control of the conversation, her voice pleading. Mom, you're being paranoid. We're just trying to help you. Are you? Because help usually involves asking what the person wants, not telling them what they're going to do. I sat back down, feeling a sense of weary resignation, but also a quiet strength. Sarah, in all these many conversations about my future, have you ever once asked me what I actually want? Of course we want what's best for you. That's not what I asked. Have you ever asked me what I want? The silence stretched long and uncomfortable. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice filled with a newfound sincerity. What do you want, Dorothy? I want to live in my own apartment for as long as I am able. I want to make my own decisions about my healthcare, my finances, and my social life. I want to be treated like a competent, capable adult, not like a problem to be managed. I paused, looking at each of them in turn. And I want my daughter to see me as a person worth respecting, not just an obligation to be discharged as efficiently as possible. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, real tears this time. I do respect you. I'm scared, Mom. I'm scared something will happen to you and I won't know how to handle it. For the first time all evening, I heard something genuine, something vulnerable in her voice. Sarah being scared is normal, but being scared doesn't justify trying to control someone else's life. I'm not trying to control your life. You're trying to protect yourself, I said gently. From what? From making my own mistakes, from living independently, from having the dignity of making my own choices, even if they're not the ones you would make. I reached across and took her hand. Sweetheart, I've been taking care of myself for 68 years. I raised you. I supported your father through cancer. I managed a library budget and staff for 3 decades. Why do you suddenly think I'm incapable of managing my own life? Michael was nodding slowly, a look of dawning comprehension on his face. She has a point, Sarah. Your mother seems pretty sharp to me. Patricia tried one more time, a last-ditch effort. But the financial protections at Meadowbrook are designed to protect the facility's revenue stream, not the residents' interests. I interrupted, my voice firm. Patricia, I may be old, but I am not stupid. I can read financial documents, and I can spot a bad deal when I see one. Sarah wiped her eyes with her napkin, her shoulders slumping in defeat. So what happens now? You just go back to your apartment and we pretend this never happened. I go back to my apartment and continue living my life. You go back to yours and you stop trying to manage mine. I gathered my purse and stood up, feeling a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a quiet sense of victory. And maybe if you can learn to see me as an equal rather than a dependent, we can begin to rebuild some kind of relationship. But what if you do need help someday? Sarah asked, her voice small, filled with a childlike fear. Then I will ask for it. And if you're willing to provide it respectfully, without trying to take over my life, then maybe we can work something out. I paused at the door, turning back to face them one last time. But Sarah, if I ever do need care, it will be my decision how to handle it. Not yours, not Patricia's, and certainly not some predatory facility that sees me only as a source of revenue. As I drove home through the quiet tree-lined streets, I realized that the evening had gone better than I had ever expected. Frank's letter had given me the ammunition I needed, but my own research had given me something far more valuable, the knowledge that I was right to resist their pressure, that my instincts were sound. More importantly, I had seen a glimpse of the real Sarah, hiding underneath all the layers of fear and calculation. A young woman who was genuinely deeply scared of the responsibilities that came with having aging parents. 3 weeks later, Sarah called to ask if we could have coffee. Just the two of us, she had said. No Michael, no Patricia, no agenda about your living situation. I was skeptical but curious enough to agree. We met at a small, unassuming cafe near the library neutral territory where neither of us held the advantage. Sarah looked different, tired, less polished than usual. Her perfect, confident composure had cracks in it that I had never seen before. I've been thinking about what you said, she began without preamble, her voice low. About not asking what you wanted. About treating you like a problem instead of a person. I waited, sipping my coffee, curious to see where this was going. I talked to a therapist about it. She admitted, her gaze fixed on her coffee cup. About why I was so fixated on getting you into that place. Sarah's hands were wrapped tightly around her cup as if she were trying to warm herself from a deep internal chill. She asked me when I started being afraid of you getting older, and I realized it was when Dad got sick. When I realized that loving someone, loving them with all your heart, doesn't protect them from aging or dying or needing help. Tears started to form in her eyes, real, genuine tears of sorrow. I watched you take care of him, Mum, and I thought about how someday someone would have to take care of you, and I panicked. This was more honesty than I had heard from my daughter in years. Why did that scare you so much? Because I didn't think I could do it, she whispered, her voice breaking completely. I didn't think I was strong enough, or patient enough, or good enough to take care of you the way you took care of him. So I convinced myself that the solution was to find someone else to do it. Someone professional. Someone better at caregiving than me. I felt something shift in my chest, a tight knot of pain and anger beginning to loosen. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was understanding. Sarah, no one expects you to be a professional caregiver. But what if you do need help? Real help, not just emotional support. She looked up at me, then her eyes filled with a vulnerability that seemed so much younger than her 32 years. What if you get sick like Dad did? Then we will figure it out, together. But that doesn't mean signing away my independence now just because something might happen later. I know that now. The therapist explained the difference between planning for possible futures and trying to control them. Sarah wiped her eyes with her napkin, a small sad smile touching her lips. She also pointed out that I was treating you like you were already incapacitated, instead of like someone who could and should participate in planning for her own future. We sat in silence for several minutes, the clatter of the cafe, a distant muffled sound. I thought about Frank's letter, about the daughter he had been so desperately trying to protect me from. But I could also see sitting across from me, the daughter he had raised, scared, imperfect, but capable of growth of change. "What about Patricia?" I asked. "And Michael?" Michael was horrified when he really understood what we were planning. He said it reminded him of the way his grandfather's business partners tried to pressure him into selling the company when he got dementia. Sarah managed a weak smile. Apparently, the Ashford family has some experience with people trying to take advantage of vulnerable seniors. And Patricia. Sarah looked embarrassed. She's convinced this whole thing got blown out of proportion, that we should have just handled the Dorothy situation more quietly. She actually said that. The Dorothy situation. I had to laugh. Well, at least she's consistent. "I'm sorry, Mom. I am so sorry. For calling you a failure, for trying to warehouse you, for treating you like a burden instead of my mother." Sarah reached across the table and took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "I don't know if I can be the daughter you deserve, but I would really like to try. You don't have to be perfect, Sarah. You just have to see me as a person." I squeezed her hand. "And maybe ask my opinion before making any major decisions about my life. Deal? But Mom, if you ever do need help, real help, not just the normal stuff that comes with aging, will you tell me? Will you let me be part of the solution instead of shutting me out?" I considered this carefully. The old Dorothy, the one who had always prided herself on her independence, would have promised to handle everything herself, to never be a burden. But Frank's letter had taught me something about the cost of protecting people and oneself from difficult truths. "I'll tell you," I said finally. "But Sarah, being part of the solution means respecting my choices, even if they're not the choices you would make." "I understand." As we prepared to leave, Sarah hesitated. "Mom, there's something else. About Dad's letter." I tensed, wondering if she was going to challenge its authenticity or accuse me of manipulating his words. "I'm glad he wrote it. Not because of what it said about me, but because it meant he was still protecting you even after he was gone." Her voice was soft, filled with a quiet awe. "I hope someday I'll be smart enough to love someone that completely." Driving home, I realized that the woman I had raised was still there, hiding underneath all the layers of fear and social calculation. It was going to take time to rebuild our relationship, and it would never be the same as it was before. The innocent, unwavering trust was gone, replaced by something more fragile, more complex. But maybe with enough honesty and patience, it could become something better, something stronger. 6 months later, I was reading in my favorite armchair when my phone rang. It was Sarah calling for what had become our weekly check-in. Not to manage my life or push me toward any particular decision, but just to talk, to connect. "How was your week?" she asked, and I could hear the genuine interest in her voice, a sound that was still new and precious to me. "Good. I had lunch with Margaret, went to the book club at the library, and I started reading that novel you recommended." I settled back in my chair, a feeling of contentment washing over me. "How about you? I saw the pictures from the gala on Saturday. You looked beautiful." "Thanks, it was a lot. But Michael's happy, so that's what matters." "Oh, and Robert and I went to a concert on Saturday." There was a slight pause. Robert was still a relatively new and very welcome development in my life. He was a retired English professor I had met at the library's lecture series, a kind, intelligent man with a wonderful dry sense of humor. We had been seeing each other for 3 months, taking things slowly, and enjoying each other's company immensely. "How are things going with him?" Sarah asked carefully, her voice tentative. "Very well. He's intelligent, kind, and he treats me like an adult who is capable of making her own decisions." I smiled, knowing Sarah would catch the gentle, teasing reference to our earlier conversations. "It's amazing how refreshing that can be. I deserve that." Sarah laughed, a genuine, easy sound. But seriously, I'm glad you're happy. You deserve someone who appreciates you. This was still new territory for us, this easy open affection. Sarah showing genuine interest in my happiness, rather than just my welfare. The therapy was helping, no doubt, but more than that, she seemed to be discovering that having a mother with an independent, fulfilling life was actually more interesting and less threatening than having one who existed solely to be managed. Speaking of appreciation, I said, "How are things with Michael and Patricia?" "Michael's good. He's been asking more questions about my family, about you and Dad. I think meeting you, really seeing you, made him realize that not all mothers-in-law are like his mother." Sarah's voice got quieter. "Patricia is adjusting. She's stopped mentioning assisted living facilities, at least. So that's progress." She sighed. "She asked me last week if you were still harboring resentment about the Meterbrook situation. I told her that you weren't harboring anything. You had simply learned to be more careful about trusting her judgment." I laughed. "I bet that went over well. About as well as you'd expect. But Michael backed me up, which was good. He pointed out that trust has to be earned back after it's been broken. We talked for another 20 minutes about books about Sarah's work, about Robert's grandchildren, and their upcoming visit. It was a normal, easy family conversation, the kind we hadn't had in years. When we hung up, I realized how much I had missed this version of my daughter, the one who was not afraid to be herself. The next morning, I was surprised to get a call from Michael. "Dorothy, I hope you don't mind me calling directly. I wanted to ask you something." "Of course, Michael. What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking a lot about what happened last year with the whole Meadowbrook situation, and I realize I didn't handle it very well. I let my mother push an agenda that wasn't in your best interests. I waited curious to see where this was going. I wanted you to know that Sarah and I have talked about it extensively. We've agreed that any future decisions about family matters will include you as an equal participant, not just someone whose life gets planned by other people. I appreciate that, Michael. There's something else. Sarah mentioned that you might be interested in traveling more now that you're not worried about us pressuring you into assisted living." This was news to me. She said you'd always wanted to see Ireland, but never had the chance. "Patricia and I are planning a family trip to Europe next spring, and we'd like you to join us as our guest." I was quiet for a moment, processing this unexpected and very generous invitation. "That's very kind, Michael. But before you say no, let me explain. It wouldn't be a family obligation trip where you'd have to keep up with our schedule or pretend to enjoy activities you don't like. We'd plan some things together, of course, but you'd have plenty of independence to explore on your own. And Patricia is on board with this." Michael laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "Patricia actually suggested it. I think she's finally figured out that having a happy, independent mother-in-law reflects better on the family than having one who feels pushed around and resentful." After we hung up, I sat in my small apartment, the sunlight streaming in through the window, and thought about how dramatically my life had changed in the past year. 12 months ago, my daughter had been planning to put me in an institution and take control of my assets. Now she was encouraging me to travel internationally and including me in family plans as an equal respected participant. The difference wasn't just in Sarah's attitude, it was in my own willingness to stand up for myself, to demand respect. Frank's letter had given me the permission to fight back, but the real lasting change had come from recognizing my own worth and refusing to accept any treatment that diminished it. A year later, I was packing for Ireland when Sarah arrived at my apartment with coffee and pastries from my favorite bakery. "Excited about tomorrow?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my sofa. "Nervous and excited," I admitted. "It's been a long time since I've traveled anywhere more exotic than Hartford. You're going to love it. And Mom, I'm really, really glad you said yes to the trip." I looked up from folding a stack of sweaters. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Last year, when you were so determined to get me into Meadowbrook, were you really worried about my safety, or were you more worried about the inconvenience of having an aging parent?" She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze thoughtful. "Honestly, both. I was scared something would happen to you, but I was also scared of how that would affect my life with Michael. I wanted the peace of mind that comes with knowing someone else was handling the hard stuff. And now, Now, I realize that the hard stuff is part of loving someone. You can't just outsource the difficult parts of relationships and expect the good parts to remain meaningful. She smiled, a real genuine smile that reached her eyes. Besides, you've proven pretty conclusively that you don't need to be handled by anyone. I laughed, thinking about everything that had led us to this point. Frank's letter, a warning from beyond the grave. My research into Meadowbrook Manor. The painful confrontation in Sarah's perfect living room, where I had finally stood up for myself. And the long, difficult months of therapy and honest conversations that had followed. You know what your father would say about all this? I asked. What? He'd say the best gift he ever gave me wasn't the letter warning me about your plans. It was teaching me that I was worth fighting for. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of love, not fear. I think he'd be proud of both of us. You for standing up for yourself and me, for finally learning to see you as a person instead of a problem. He'd definitely be proud, I agreed, and probably immensely relieved that he doesn't have to haunt Patricia for recommending questionable senior living facilities. We both laughed at that image. Patricia had indeed adjusted her approach to our family dynamics, though I suspected it was more about maintaining her carefully crafted social position than any genuine change of heart. But that was fine with me. I didn't need Patricia to love me. I just needed her to respect my autonomy. Mom, there's something I want to say before you leave for Ireland. I stopped packing and gave her my full attention. Thank you for not giving up on me. When you played Dad's letter that night, you could have just exposed what I was planning and walked away. You could have written me off as a selfish, heartless daughter who didn't deserve a relationship with you. I thought about it, I said honestly, but you didn't. You gave me the chance to understand what I had become and to choose to be better. Not everyone would have done that. I sat down next to her on the sofa, the familiar comfort of her presence a balm to my soul. Sarah, you're my daughter, not because you're perfect, but because we're family. And real family doesn't just disappear when people make mistakes. It just requires everyone to work a little harder at being honest with each other. I love you, Mom, not for what you can do for me or what you represent in my life, but because you're Dorothy Williams. A woman who worked for 30 years at a job she loved, who raised a difficult, stubborn daughter with patience and grace, and who had the courage to fight for her own dignity when everyone around her was trying to take it away. As we hugged goodbye, I thought about the long, painful journey that had brought us here. The searing pain of hearing my own daughter call me a pathetic failure. The cold, creeping fear of losing my independence to someone else's convenience. And the slow, dawning discovery that I was stronger and more valuable than I had ever allowed myself to believe. Frank's letter had started it all, a final, desperate act of love. But the real victory had been in learning to see myself the way he had always seen me, as a person worth respecting, worth fighting for, worth loving exactly as I was. Tomorrow, I would board a plane for Ireland, not as a burden to be managed by my wealthy, well-meaning family, but as Dorothy Williams, a 69-year-old woman, embarking on an adventure she had dreamed about for decades. Some victories don't come with fanfare or celebration. Sometimes the greatest triumph is simply the quiet, profound satisfaction of knowing you refused to disappear when everyone around you was trying to make you invisible. And that, I thought, as I finished packing my suitcase, was exactly the kind of legacy Frank would have wanted me to create.